All right. Hi, everyone. This is Conversations with Dom. I'm your host, Dom. Brought to you by I'm Breaking Into Tech. And today I have the pleasure of bringing on who I say is a thought leader in the pre-sales space, Brian Lewis, who's the co-founder and CRO of Homerun Presales. So some background here, Brian and I, we met on LinkedIn. I was a longtime admirer of some of the posts that he put on there around the pre-sales profession. And like I've told many people on here, if you're going to reach out, have a reason why you're reaching out. And I told him what I liked, what I saw. We ended up talking a bit, found out we had a bunch in common, including that, we both went to UC Berkeley and we both lived, go Bears, and we both lived in Oakland. Like we live, less than 15 minutes away from each other, probably like 10 minutes.
Yep.
We got some coffee and yeah, funny enough, we just met up a couple weeks ago. This will be the first time people are hearing about it on the podcast, but I recently have had, I have a son. His name's Victor, and I'm a new father. So I'm currently on paternity leave as we're recording this. But the week before, Brian and I had lunch at a Persian restaurant over at Lake Merritt in Oakland. So yeah, Brian, good to see you again. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself, where you're from, what you studied, all of that stuff.
Sure. Well, first, congrats on the new addition to the family. Super excited for you and your wife. So I've been in pre-sales almost all of my career, and I'll talk more about how I got in there. But I actually went through my first job was a mix of, I guess it was the most hybrid job you can get. It was pre-sales, it was sales, it was post-sales, all rolled into one. It was at a tiny company. I was one of the first few people there. But I came out of graduate school actually, and was looking for a software consulting company that did what I did, which was some advanced analytics for supply chain management, and found this company and went in and started there. But from day one, it was, again, part pre-sales, part sales, part post-sales, all rolled into one. Stayed with that company for a long time as an IC role, the team lead manager, product manager, and then have been at Homerun for the last couple of years.
Nice. So with that, like with what you're kind of been telling me about this, by being into that role where you sort of moved into different sections of it, what was sort of the common thread that kind of led you into, I would say, this whole space, I would say, because again, based on what we were just talking about before we started recording this, you've had your master's, you have a PhD. Why don't you tell us about that, sort of that
Sure.
kind of transition into getting into software in general? Did you know you wanted to do that, or did you kind of land in it?
No, I didn't. And especially since this is like, I'm breaking into tech, kind of theme here. I mean, I knew I liked, so it's a field called industrial engineering, which is all about process modeling and optimization, any business process, kind of traditionally more manufacturing, but really any business process. And then there's a kind of a counterpart to that called operations research, which is applied math to decision-making. So you kind of take that together, and that's been my background around looking at a process. How do you model it, think about it, optimize it to get better within any kind of business situation? So I knew I liked that. I kept moving through graduate school because I wanted to keep pursuing it and go deeper and deeper. And then when I was finishing my PhD, I was applying that work to supply chain management. So I knew I wanted to keep doing that kind of analytical work, working directly with businesses to apply it. And I knew I wanted, the only places to really do that well, I thought were, and to have a variety, was either a software company that had software to do that, or a consulting company to go in and do that work. And I happened to find a software company. I was living in North Carolina at the time, so they were kind of in my backyard, and started up with them. So yeah.
Wow. I feel like that's pretty common where, you talk and you see, hey, I'm passionate about something, or I like something, and then you try to apply it in one way or the other. So in this case, I feel like I talked about this with the last interview that I did, where there's a good degree of problem solving that you like doing, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
That kind of got you to that point. So with that, go ahead. Yeah.
I was gonna say, that also, for my graduate school, I didn't actually mean to go all the way to the PhD. And what I mean by that, and this is like about if somebody's trying to break into tech, when anybody asks me those kinds of questions or break into pre-sales, I always talk about just being open to the possibilities and don't kind of close off doors. So, for example, I didn't apply to a PhD program. I actually applied to a master's program at University of Michigan, but they had so I got in, and the department chair had called me and said, "Great, we're going to welcome you into that program, but would you be interested in doing a PhD?" And I said, "Well, not really." And he said, "Well, on the application, you check the box that you might be interested in doing a PhD someday." And I said, "Well, sure. I mean, you check. Are you interested someday? Sure." So I kind of checked the box. But it led down them making the pitch around if you come in to do the PhD versus the master's, how it works and how it's funded, which was a key thing. And ultimately I said, well, that seems like the better route for me then is to go deeper through the PhD. And also, again, it was partially paid for, in which the master's wouldn't have been. But it all kind of came down to, just being open to check that box and not to say no, but like, yeah, maybe someday, sure, I'll check that box and see what happens. Not that I intended anything to happen from it, but that then led me down a very different path. So I always like that as just a career concept of check the box when in doubt, be open to those possibilities because you never know what that might open up for you.
Well, even going into the company that you said you were there for a long time and you were doing pre-sales, sales, and then you ended up going into product management. Does that fall in that same vein of, yeah, I could do this. I have that mentality of I'll try it out.
Sure.
You think that happened a lot during those opportunities? Because I was looking at your LinkedIn, I'm like, you're like, wow, you ended up becoming like a product manager, VP of product management. And I'd be really curious to understand sort of how you got into, that track in general, like how you even went down there. Was it just, hey, I'm not going to say no to this, or did the opportunity sort of present itself and you're like, yeah, I'm going to try this out?
Yeah, when I was looking for jobs out of graduate school, I didn't have a sense of, I know I want to be at a big company or a small company or like a known company. I didn't have any real thoughts around that. I was just looking for what's going to be a good place to apply what I know and learn a lot. And so when I did apply and the company's name was Vanguard Software, when I applied there, it turns out that it was the founder, his wife part-time doing accounting, and his buddy Stu is the marketing guy. So he needed somebody else to come in and take over and do the sales and the consulting and all that kind of stuff that he didn't have time to do because he had to go back and code the platform for one of their key customers. So he made his, pitch around, why don't you come in and do all of the sales and pre-sales and post-sales, right? Everything that's not coding, accounting, or marketing. And this was, I've told the story before, but I didn't know how to do any of that, right? I was expecting to come in and learn a lot more and have structure in place. But I really liked what they were doing. I really liked him and his wife and Stu. And I thought, okay, this is a place where, again, sort of like checking the box. I'm gonna take a leap on this one. And he said the same thing. He's like, look, I don't like doing that work, so you can't be any worse than me. Just come in and be helpful with our customers and prospects and see how we can help them and then help them carry them all the way through buying the software, using the software, setting it up, and so on. So I guess in a way, it was about being open to that because I'm coming in to a job where I've trained and applied math, right, at a PhD level, not how to do sales demos for software, which I had never done in my entire life. So I kind of had to do all of that out of necessity because there was nobody else in the earliest days. And I loved it. It was great.
Yeah, you hear those stories where people nowadays, or not even say nowadays, but a lot of people have these expectations of like, hey, if I need to come in and try to get into tech industry, I need to shoot for the Googles, the Microsofts,
right,
the big name brand tech companies. But I would say to that story that you said, I feel like the real opportunity where they will give people a chance is those very small early stage startups where you have to wear many hats and you have to learn, on your feet. And it sounds like that was your experience in that whole situation.
Yeah, I think definitely. And I mean, I at that point, I was very comfortable with what I knew and didn't know. I was excited about this opportunity. I trusted in Rob as my boss and founder of this company that he was going to guide me through and teach me. But at the same time, it was almost all learn by doing. There was no sales methodology. There was no structure. Sure. There was no process. There was no training on how to do that. So it really was get on a call and be like, oh, that didn't go well, and try something different. So it was a lot of learning by doing. So for somebody who's coming in if you're okay with that, then those smaller organizations might be a great place to learn and thrive, as long as you're willing to do the self research on your own. But I think where the benefit of the larger companies, which I worked for very briefly after Vanguard Software got acquired, was that they do come with a lot of structure and training programs and onboarding programs, and this is how we do it, and these are best practices. So for somebody who's coming in who wants that training, on the job training, I do think you'll find more success with some of those larger organizations. It's sort of just, where are you comfortable at, and what kind of education, job education, do you want along the way?
No, I think that makes sense, because I did a very similar thing. I actually started off at a very small company. It was my first job. It was like a sales job. And funny enough, I wasn't there super long. And then I ended up going to LinkedIn. But that it's kind of a very similar situation where I was like, oh, here, do sales. And so I had no clue what I was doing. I was on LinkedIn. I was cold emailing people and trying to, cold call folks. And I had no clue what I was doing.
Oh.
But even just getting that small experience doing that, I still ended up going to a bigger company where I learned more of those skills. And I've kind of gone back and forth between smaller companies and bigger companies. And I feel like sort of a Goldilocks effect. You kind of find the right size company that you want, or I think we can transition it over into asking more of then you can have your own company, like you're doing right now with Homerun Presales. So why don't you tell us that, tell us more about Homerun Presales and what it's been like starting your own company.
Yeah. I mean, big picture around Homerun, it's been great. Company's doing really well and growing in all the right ways. We're very fortunate and very proud to be fully self-funded and profitable with a great customer base. So all the things as a startup founder you'd hope and dream for are kind of happening. So that's just been really exciting. But I run Homerun Presales with my brother Kevin. So he actually, back in 2018, built out the first version of Homerun. He'd been a software developer for most of his career, moved into an SE role, which he loved. Then look at his new role and his the tools he had, and said, well, we've got Salesforce for some stuff, a couple fields there, but he was creating Google Sheets to keep track of key details for his deals, and then more Google Sheets for each POC, and then notes over here and tasks over there. And said, okay, this is a mess. Surely there must be a better way. Looked for pre-sales tools, didn't find any. So as any good former software developer does, built himself the perfect tool kind of as a side project just to help him get through his day. But that worked really well for him. And then he gave it to his team and they loved it. And that's when he brought it over to me, which coincidentally was also in a pre-sales role at that time at that other supply chain company, and said, hey, Brian, I think this might be a thing. And so we then spent, a little while figuring out what's the right kind of pre-sales tool. How should this work for enabling individual contributors, but also making sure management and leadership get the data metrics they need. So, fast forward to today, we have Homerun as a company, but it's been, a career's worth of learning packed into the idea, packed into the software, and of course now what it is today. But it's fun also to be having spent a career in pre-sales and then working with pre-sales team to make them even better through the software. It's fun.
Well, I was going to say, you probably empathize. One of the things, and I think that's the thing that gravitated me towards you, was you empathize with the plight of the SE. You know what we all do because you've done it for so long too. So, with that, I guess even going more into, the second portion, this was talking, I think, more about the pre-sales, industry and sort of the role. If you're talking with pre-sales people all the time, what would you say are the top 3 things you're hearing from the people you're trying to sell, Homerun to, or just talk more to Homerun about? Yeah. What are they saying?
Yeah. There are some themes out there. Right now, no surprise, budgets are tight, headcount's tight. Unfortunately, there are reduction in forces, rifts and layoffs and so on that are happening, and other companies that are growing. So it's not all doom and gloom. But I think some of those themes around we're being asked to do more or the same with the same headcount or less headcount, right? So do more with less, essentially. And that is challenging, especially when you don't have a well-structured process, you don't have the right tooling in place, maybe you don't even know what metrics to be looking at, right? And that's there too. So a lot of companies are coming to us with those challenges. How do we do more with less? Some people call it about scaling pre-sales and so on, but it's not always about scaling. It's just doing more with less. So that's one part of it. I think the other challenge comes into just the way that buying teams are buying. So there's a lot of, Gartner's done some stuff and a lot of conversations around buyer enablement and that idea that it's not the same as it was in the past. Buyers coming in more educated, more self-service. And so they're expecting by the time they do engage with us on the pre-sales team, or at least live humans, they're coming in with a different set of knowledge than they have in the past, and sort of are expecting now a deal to maybe move a little bit differently in the past. I think that's largely true. I think it depends on the type of company you're at. I mean,
sure.
Are the people we talk to, they want to talk to us. They want to have a conversation. They want to tell us their challenges. They want to see if they can help. I think part of that is because pre-sales tools like Homerun, these like pre-sales productivity management, they're so new that this is like people's first exposure to a tool like this even exists. So naturally, there's like a lot of questions around, what is it? How can it help? Let me tell you everything. You tell me if this is even relevant. But yeah, that idea of like the buying cycle, though, being a little bit different. And then I guess the last thing would be, and it's not so much of an issue like that pre-sales teams are facing. I think it's more of like the opportunity that sits in front of all of us on the pre-sales side that is different. Maybe not different, but there's more exposure to this idea that, and the phrase we always like to use, the pre-sales team is sitting on data that no one else has, but everyone wants, right? They know things. And now there's more and more requests of, hey, share that knowledge out to help us improve sales forecast accuracy, and share that information with our product team to help prioritize the roadmap, and share that with our customer success team so we can onboard a customer more efficiently, more effectively, and give them a better onboarding experience because everything that was done and said kind of during the sales cycle. So those are, a couple areas that kind of come to mind when we think about what are pre-sales teams facing, what are they talking about today?
I think it makes a lot of sense because I think about the tools that I use on the daily basis, right? And it's to your point where there's all these things that a lot of pre-sales folks have to use, but don't necessarily serve us.
Right. Yeah.
We're always looked to for data, but there's not a good way to receive data from us that isn't dependent on someone else's real lane or responsibility or system. Like, hey, salespeople use Salesforce, so we have to use Salesforce to put our notes in there. Oh, product people want to hear what you're doing. Log an issue in Jira. So I get what you're saying too. Is it ends up becoming sort of it's a completely new market actually if you think about it, because pre-sales in and of itself, in my opinion, is one of those roles where it's been around for a while, but it's so misunderstood.
Yeah. And so many different varieties to it,
exactly.
Right? Are you pre-sales only, or are you pre-sales and post-sales, but you still call it pre-sales? Or are you a solutions consulting organization, which kind of spans everything? And then you maybe only get involved in new opportunities and net new logos, but not renewals. Or maybe you do get involved in renewals, or maybe you do POCs, but maybe not. So there's a million different variations that I think has made it harder to define the role as a go-to-market function, to define, even the titling, of course, which is all over the place. But also, what are the expectations of these teams? It varies so much. But also, when we think about pre-sales tooling, this goes back to when Kevin built that first version was, as an individual contributor, there's a lot of things that I have going on at any one time, and it's kind of spread across many to no tools. A couple fields in Salesforce is not really pre-sales tooling because it doesn't really help me or enable me as an individual contributor to juggle my deals and know what's most important and raise the warning signs. So there's just an evolution now of like realizing there are better ways, and there are also tools to support it.
Well, I think it comes down to, and maybe that's the thing that I've always noticed, is when I've been in these roles, and I've only been doing this role for about 4 years, but you hear about sales process, but I feel like there's not really a true pre-sales process in most places. Yeah. We seem like we're just on the bus with sales when ultimately, even though we are, but there are certain things that we need to capture and do, which I think your tool, based on what you're saying, solves for. Is it helps define what is more idealized process for an SE team too, as well.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely true. And even if we put Homerun aside for a moment, I mean, that idea that
problem in general.
that idea that the pre-sales team being key contributors into the sales cycle. So like, people like to talk about, traditionally sales engineers were like technical support, basically come in and answer some technical questions. And that is part of the job. But I think the modern pre-sales function and the best, in class teams are realizing that we are collaborators with our AEs on the deal. We can contribute a lot more if we actually decide to contribute more versus if I just show up and give the demo and be like, not my problem, not my deal. Like the AE will handle it. Okay, you're going to do fine as an organization. But if you have an SE who is collaborating with their AE on, all right, what's our plan here? How do we prepare for a demo? What do we know so far? What should I ask versus what should you ask? And how do we make sure we break up the monotony of just one person talking? And how do we play off of each other? And, and there's a lot more that the pre-sales team can do to be an active participant in moving that deal along and helping to close it versus just, I'll do my task. I'll do my demo and then it's not my problem. No, you should. How else can you be engaging with that buyer after that first demo? By sending some follow-up stuff without your AE. And I did some posts about this because I think it's really important about, SEs being able to follow up and engage with buyers separate from their AEs, but by plan, right? You're kind of deciding to do this back and forth to kind of help move some deals forward.
We've talked a lot about that in my job too, where trying to have SEs truly own a relationship.
Yeah.
Without necessarily, definitely keeping the AE informed, but being able to say you built a relationship, maybe it's an admin at the company that you're trying to sell or some sort of a technical buyer that's maybe not the executive, but being able to have conversations, one-on-one, or maybe not even one-on-one, but just being able to have that, exactly what you're saying, be able to send content without having your AE having to send it.
Yeah.
I agree. I think it's important because I think the rules changed a lot, kind of probably from based on what you're saying, us being kind of technical support. One of the things that you did mention in your 3 issues that I was really curious about was the buyer's process changing in general with like the customers. I wanted to kind of talk more about that because I think it kind of comes into the second question I was going to ask in this whole section. But what are you seeing that's changing in the buyer's process, or that you're hearing from your buyers is what I'm trying to say. Like what sort of if you're ear to the ground, what kind of things are you actually hearing that like, hey, we typically have this process, but the buyer wants to do it this way now. I'm just out of curiosity. I'm just wondering if you've heard anything interesting, because I've definitely seen it a lot too, based on sometimes process goes out the window because things change.
Yeah, I mean, I would have to compare like what I see now for new leads coming in to Homerun versus like what I saw when new leads were coming in at Vanguard Software. I mean, I believe a lot of the research out there around the buying cycle changing and the amount of research. I mean, just there is a lot more that buyers can do on their own, in terms of review sites and other kinds of industry reports. And I think there's more availability of more materials, which helps buyers get educated. I think a lot of the companies that have been more of like that emergence of the product-led growth has led buyers to want to get hands-on software and learn well before they really engage. I think also just as humans and as consumers, we're used to going in and trying out an app on our phone and be like, all right, that doesn't work. Let me get rid of that. Let me go find another one. So just, I think that sort of consumer behavior is leading into the, what we'll call like the enterprise buying process. But at least for Homerun, a lot of our buyers are still coming in and saying, I want to engage. I want to tell you my problems. I want to see if your kind of solution can help. And if so, give me some guidance. Oh, and by the way, you're an expert in pre-sales. What about related tools like demo automation tools? What would you recommend there? RFP tools. So we get asked for our advice and guidance on, or recommendations on that kind of stuff as well, just as industry experts. So we don't get a lot of, mean, I guess you never know the leads that you never got because you didn't expose everything on a website, I suppose. But I mean, at least we're comfortable with our level of growth without that. But I do think that we hear more people coming in having tried to do research or have done research on review sites, and they've scoured the website, they've learned everything they can. They're coming in and telling us that we've learned everything we possibly can. Now it's time to chat. And I don't think we saw that so much in my prior 5-10 years ago. It would be they Google searched, they found you, and then they just wanted to engage right from the very beginning. And then we're kind of coming in a little bit blinder to the information that might have been out there. So,
yeah, I agree. I think people are more educated, right? Yeah. Ultimately, and it sort of comes, I think, with the second thing, the next question I'm going to ask, right? Which, to your point, people are trying to try things and they want to learn things, and I think it's one of those things that I've seen a lot, where you go onto most SaaS software company websites and they'll say, request a demo, book a demo. And you put that request there. So what does that buying process look like? An SDR calls them, does an initial 15-minute call, then puts them on with an AE. That's like a 30-minute call. The AE might say, oh, I need to bring in my SE, and then do another, 45 minutes, to an hour technical discovery. And then I'm finally getting the demo, which kind of comes to the question that I'm going to ask, since I feel like you both know where we're going. Like, is disco demo a dirty word? Because I think after 4 calls, I think that's insane that a customer wants to see something and we're saying demo, that they have to go through that many hoops to even see something.
No, I mean, I think it's a really great point around, I kind of talked about buyers doing research, but I mean, there's just that fear and frustration of, I really need to understand the solution. I want to understand it, but I'm already worried about those 10 different hoops I have to go through and the 10 different people of retailing the same 10 different things or same 10 things to 10 different people. I really just want to get to it. And I think that, again, maybe back to like our own consumer behavior of being able to get hands-on apps so quickly versus now in the buying when you're buying enterprise software, it's a little bit different. So I think that's a good call out. I love the disco demo. It is not a dirty word or phrase. I know there's a lot of different camps on this. I think at the end of the day, for all of those that are like, you must do discovery before giving a demo, I 100% agree with that. I don't think they need to be 2 different calls or an SDR BDR qualification. I mean, that's a scale thing. Like if you're, you have to sort of eliminate down because there's just not enough people, butts in seats to be able to service that many leads coming in. So like a lot of that stuff comes down to scale of leads. But I think you can have a very effective intro, discovery, and demo in an hour's time, even if it's a very complex solution or comprehensive solution like Homerun. That's how we do it, and it works really well for us. And like, I know when the conversation's going a little bit longer and I'm going to be crunched on demo time, but if it's the right kind of conversation and I'm learning a lot, then I'm going to let some of that float a little bit. And I'm going to maybe pare down some of the slideware, which is less about the company and more about how and why we think. So, I kind of roughly know where I would want to be within the hour and in terms of agenda, but no, the disco discovery works. And then you just collapse everything down into one meeting versus having to do it over 2. And then there's like 2 different weeks and then somebody's on vacation and now it's 3 weeks later. And I don't know, it just doesn't work well for anybody, I don't think.
I agree. For me, and this is what I've been noticing a lot just in the trainings that I've done, is that even when you're interviewing for a company, right, they focus on that you're going to be doing like an executive style demo all the time. And I don't think that's realistic because the majority of the stuff is kind of not for every company, right? But if it's a SaaS company, I would say a lot of the times you're not prepping for an executive style presentation where it's going to be super like strategic. A lot of times some of these deal things are a lot more tactical. Not to say they're not strategic in the methods, but you're not going to have the time to tell like an insane story that a completely custom, demo instance or whatever.
Right.
And I it's one of those things where like I see both of it. I think people should have the skills on both, but I think there needs to be more emphasis on how to do a better disco demo because I think it's going to come up a lot more in the future. They want to see product earlier.
Yeah, and I think I do think it's a disservice to the organization if you can't get your process down where, even if you don't want to, and even if it's not your standard, you should have a process that allows for a 1 hour disco demo, because that's going to force you to ask the right questions, kind of upfront in the discovery process. And you're not going to learn everything on the first call. And you may not learn about who's their ultimate sponsor and their budget, which I know is an important qualification, but you have enough time to ask challenges and goals and what's going on in the business and the stuff that's actually important to being helpful and providing them the right solution. And then I think on the demo side of it, sure, maybe you don't have a harbor cruise, but I just asked you about challenges and what's going on in the business and what your goals are and what's happening for next fiscal year and what's your C-level talking about. I can certainly tailor what I'm going to show and how I talk about it based on what you just told me in 20 minutes to give you a sense of how Homerun's going to help without having shown you everything. There's no reason why, you can't get to that point. Even if you have hundreds of products, sure, you still have to pick and choose like what you're going to show. And that's a very different situation. But I think most, even enterprise grade applications, I think can get themselves to a disco demo because it forces you to be specific in what you do and careful in what you show, which is what we train ourselves on what we do as SEs. We try and get to that point always. So good, make that the goal. And then you're going to be set up for success if you have more time or if it's split into two.
I agree. And I kind of look at that too, is even if the disco demo is more of a proof point to help you continue to make sure we're on the same page, doesn't mean you can't do the strategic readout presentation.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be mutually exclusive where it's one or the other. They all have to be looked at as tools in a tool belt that everything you need to use to end up closing the deal.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's very true. I mean, the short form, the long form. And I think a lot of that is also just that active listening of, you're telling me, I think you might be interested in A, B, and C based on what I know of my ICP. Let's use all the acronyms here, or acronyms. But you come in and you tell me about X, Y, and Z. No problem. I'm going to use that language. I'm going to show things that are relevant to you there. I may really want to show A, B, and C because I think it's relevant. And I do want to guide you on best practices, but I don't always have to do that on the first go. But being able to modify what you plan to show is important, because you're not just going to do a standard demo every time. You have to still listen and adapt.
Totally agree. I think it's one of those things that I wish there was direct trainings on how to do a disco demo, or even just to do like better high level L1 demos, right? Because I think they are powerful. And I think, to the points we've been talking about, I think customers are getting impatient, and I don't blame them.
Yeah.
If they come in asking for a demo and they're not getting one until like the fourth call, which the other thing you mentioned too, a lot of times I don't mind being on the SDR call with the AE sometimes, or maybe the SDR does the flip and then the initial call with the AE, we just combine the technical and business and deal discovery sort of together into one call. So we're making the best use of time. And even sometimes on those calls, maybe I show them a little bit of something just to understand that we're talking about the same thing, to get that sort of checkbox.
Well, and it's back to that what the buyer's expectations are, and the idea of buyer enablement is, and again, I'm not going to, dig on any company that has a very structured, separate process, and they may have very good reasons for it. Because the key thing that I would care about it and argue for is, you always have some level of discovery and you always have some level of tailored demo versus no discovery and just a standard scripted demo every single time. Like, I don't think that's going to work at all. Whether you can combine it into 1 hour or whether it's separate, I think letting the buyers know the why you're doing it. And then I do think seeing some kind of software in the very first call, even if it's screenshots in slides, something, because a lot of companies don't have a lot on their website for competitive reasons and other reasons. So, if all I have to do is listen to you ask me questions, that's great, but I still need to get a sense of what I'm getting into before I decide if I want to take a second call with you either. So it kind of goes both ways.
Well, I think it kind of comes into, I would say, the next question I'm going to ask you, because I feel like if we're moving more potentially into more of sort of those disco demo style situations, does that sort of really ask the question is, should the salesperson potentially be able to do that first demo really well, like your AE? Do we need a world where sales folks maybe need to become a little bit more technical in the product? But then to the same token, do pre-sales folks need to become more salesy? Do I see this sort of convergence here?
Yeah, I mean, I love this topic. I'll start with the second part first. Should sales engineers or pre-sales people be more salesy? 100% yes. If you only come in and think of yourself as the technical expert, I'm going to get in, I'm going to get out, you've missed the opportunity to build a relationship with that buyer. You're missing out on the opportunity to help move the deal forward, which is what you really want to do. You're missing collaboration opportunities. You're missing out on value. There's a lot that can be done, right? There's a natural distrust of your classic salesperson. Your sales engineer, we always talk about ourselves as the trusted advisor, and that's a very real thing. You are going to people buy from people. So if you have somebody you trust, you're going to listen to them and kind of follow their guidance more. And like, unfortunately, that's not really the salesperson most of the time, because we all know the salesperson is trying to close the deal. That's their job. So if you have somebody else who's that second person who can build that relationship, give good guidance, but is always there, that's going to help. But you have to, your role is to be helpful, but your role is also still to close the business and help move that deal along. Like, you can't ignore that fact and be like, oh, that's not my part of it. Otherwise, your company's not going to close as many deals or as fast as they could, because you're not really contributing. So I do think sales engineers should be more salesy than maybe a lot of them are, without going over the line, I suppose. The flip side of that, on the sales, the account executive side, of the sales rep side, should they be more technical? I don't know. I would say no. I mean, it's good to be more technical, but the worst thing you can do is think you know more, or try and know more, and then misspeak or overpromise or give bad information. So if you do have a product that is highly technical, cybersecurity, for example, something along those lines, or even supply chain management, whatever it is, then no, I don't want a sales rep trying to play the role of somebody who has deep domain expertise, because it's not going to come across well. The experts who you're selling to are going to see right through that. Should they be able to give their own demos and kind of walkthroughs and stuff like that? I think that's highly dependent on the organization. I think that's a form of qualification, right? You have an SDR that's going to sit there and ask a bunch of qualification questions before they hand it over to a rep to take it, before it becomes an opportunity. Being able to give some basic demo or a basic walkthrough as a way to educate and also qualify out if it's not a fit. If your basic premise of your platform or whatever you're selling isn't a fit for the person you just showed it to, with a basic walkthrough that's highly curated, highly trained, right? People are trained on it, then good, they're not the right fit. Get them out early before everybody wastes a lot of time on a deal that's just not going to limp along and then eventually go into a dead or a closed lost kind of category. So I like the reps being able to do some of that, whether it's live demos or walkthroughs or even slideware, because I think it can be used as a qualification part of the process.
I agree on that part. I think, and again, it's highly dependent on the product. If it's a pure like infrastructure as a service style things, like, it might be hard for someone to be like, oh, hey, I'm going to demo what AWS, because that doesn't mean anything, right? Like but if we're talking, it's like, a Salesforce, a Zendesk, or, a pure like SaaS application where you could do like a light demo. I at least from what I've seen, I've mostly been in a SaaS environment where it's been those types of tools. Like, I was at DocuSign, right? And then, that's not a super complex tool. Like, and a lot of the account executives would be able to do, some basic demos of that stuff. But to your point, I think it is more from like a qualification standpoint versus like, hey, I'm going to get so deep into the weeds that like, I don't need my SE. Like, we don't want that, but they should know enough to at least see if we're in the right, stratosphere in terms of, is this a good product fit for the company that we're trying to sell to? Yeah.
Well, I know when I was at the supply chain management software company, I mean, granted, part of it was team size, but we had our supply chain experts, kind of like myself, not only leading the demos and being the AE all rolled into one, but like we would bring experts in very early in the process because we knew that the buying team were experienced supply chain planners. They were living pain points every day, and when we brought in people that had done the job during the pre-sale cycle to give demos and talk about that, they knew they were talking to somebody that had lived that life, and therefore there was trust that was built. And if they asked a question about SKU proliferation, our team knew what that meant and the challenges behind that and why that was a problem. Versus if you didn't have that, you can still get by and show some software, kind of move a deal forward, but you miss some opportunities to, again, build a relationship very early on with some deep technical knowledge. And I think I like the idea of bringing pre-sales into the sales cycle as early as possible.
I agree.
Because we're gonna hear things differently than anybody else, on that very first call, and even things like feature requests and product apps, right? You're gonna ask me, does your product support X, Y, or Z? I know as a trained SE to ask the whys behind all of that, and even if you say, "Oh, we really need that," I might know you don't. You think you do, and I'm going to eventually help you get to the place where you realize why that's not necessary anymore. But I know it's going to take me a couple of calls to get there. So I might kind of work my way through that, build a relationship before I really say, look, you don't need that. But eventually I can say that, very, very upfront with you, because we now have a relationship. And I think you get that by bringing people, your SEs early in the sales cycle.
I agree. I always like to be in early. Like to my point, that even that initial call where the AE is meeting with the customer for the first time or a prospect, I want to be on that call. Even for them to just say, "Hey, look, we have another resource that we brought in here because we want them to build a relationship with you too as well." I've always looked at it. Sometimes half of sales is just showing up. Like half of it is literally just showing up and being like, "I'm here and I'm listening to you."
Yeah.
Even if you come in and it's not really your call, there's value in being in there.
Yeah. Now I think this goes back to like the scale thing, is depending on the size of the teams and the headcount you have, and can you really get an SE on every discovery call? It probably not. And so at some point you start to look at, all right, the AE's on it, but if now you need me to come in to give that first demo, I need good notes from the AE, which, so maybe I'm looking at a Gong recording or transcript and kind of getting the playback so I understand what was said if I couldn't actually be there, to kind of help me prepare. But that's where that collaboration comes in, is if I can't be there, I still need to know, what do we know so far? Let's plan out what we're going to show. What else do I feel like I need to ask that we don't know yet in order to know what to demo? And then even on some of those demos we were talking about, can the AE or the sales rep do the demo itself? This is where some of the newer demo automation tools come into play of like, all right, well, I can have a scripted walkthrough that a prospect could go through on their own, or that I can walk them through. That's a very safe path through it. And anything that goes off of that, somebody knows, okay, we need to bring in, somebody to give a more live demo, because that's going to go outside of what we can show here. So I think as you do continue to scale, I think that's where there's other tools that start to come into play that pre-sales have access to, like the demo automation tools, like the Homerun, to centralize and capture and have a more streamlined process and help with those handoffs along the way.
I mean, it's definitely exciting times, because even hearing more about Homerun, but also I was just talking about these demo automation tools to someone the other day. There's a lot more emphasis, I feel like, or lights are being shined on the value of what our role, but not just our role, just in general, the importance of demonstrations and the importance of being able to show visuals to customers earlier. Because I agree, like in an ideal world, if an AE could do, again, completely caveat for anyone listening, completely dependent on the product, right? Like I'm just looking at purely, if I'm going to assume this is a SaaS based product where, you log in, someone could do a trial, you could do all those things, then in an ideal world, you could do a basic L1 demo. So high level for folks there. But I think if you can't, even being able to show guided on Rails click paths that sort of express the same thing, even if it's through slides,
Yeah.
I think that those could be valuable earlier in the sales cycle.
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of different from how things used to be, where it was like, I need to get everything up front. And then we have like one demo. I think we're moving more towards where it's smaller incremental demos potentially,
Yeah.
or things are getting chunked up. And then that becomes sort of the foundation of the broader solution.
Yeah. Yeah. I think some of those new tools too, um, I mean, one of the challenge I would have loved them at Vanguard Software supply chain, because if I had to do a demo with, New Balance, who had been one of our customers, and sneakers versus Caterpillar and like large, engines versus a pharmaceutical company, just changing, if I demo a sneaker to Caterpillar, they're going to be like, I mean, conceptually it's the same. It's just a product, but the fact that it's a sneaker versus an engine versus a tablet or blister pack for pharmaceuticals, it makes a big difference to have the right context. So those kinds of demo automation tools that let you change the context of an existing environment without having to re-engineer everything would have been massively time savings for us, because we did all that work manually. So I think there's like that class. And then there's the ones that are like the click-through paths, what might be on a website before anybody even before they submit contact information, they're going through their own buyer-enabled guide path. And then I like a lot of the tools that are, okay, we've engaged live. How do I continue to engage with you, give you more content, help you socialize it internally? Because that's been a classic sales challenge forever, which is you love what you've seen today. Your next step, you tell me as a buyer, is going to be, great, I'm going to take what I've learned, I'm going to go start socializing this with the team, see if I can get some buy-in. That's something you're doing without me in the room anymore. So I've kind of lost control here, and I don't know how good you are at that. You've probably not bought a lot of tools, most likely, at least this kind of tool. So you're kind of going off and doing your best, obviously, but can I help enable you with video, with more guides, with something that's a safe, hey, if you're going to send this out to somebody and they click through this path, that can be a viable way for them to learn, like, oh, that's great, I really like that. So I think that's the fun part of how those tools are factoring into the modern pre-sales motion.
100% agree. And I had a couple more questions, and I want to be mindful of time since we're almost at an hour, and I really appreciate it. One of the, again, this show, as well as the broader on Breaking the Tech, is really for a lot of folks looking to potentially get into tech. So with the pre-sales role, I kind of want to get your take just in general, since you're talking with a lot of pre-sales professionals. What's your outlook on the demand for pre-sales roles in this industry? Because because I can tell you, like a year ago, right, or even before I got into my job that I'm in now, it was like I'm getting hit up all the time. Now it's not so much like that.
Right.
So what are you seeing right now? Are people hiring? Do you envision that there's going to be more hiring that's going to come, or is it sort of plateaued a little bit? I kind of want to get your thoughts just on what you've been seeing.
Yeah. I mean, from the pre-sales leaders that we've talked through just in our own sales cycle and across customers, I mean, headcount is certainly hard to come by, not impossible, but every CFO is looking at, how do I cut expenses? How do I be more conservative with our spend? And so, but of course, they don't really necessarily bring down the revenue targets that they're trying to hit. But so it's again back to that idea of like do more with less. So I think it is harder times perhaps now just because of the global economy. But there are, I mean, I feel like every day I'm seeing on LinkedIn companies posting new positions, whether that's IC up through leadership. So it is happening. Plus, there's always just natural turnover. People jump to a different company, it opens up positions. So in general, I'm still very bullish on pre-sales. I think it is still having that, people are calling it a renaissance or a day in the sun. There's all kinds of different versions of it, but I think the recognition of pre-sales, and I still use the kind of traditional pre-sales to mean the role, even if it's pre and post sales. I think that as a heuristic is still okay. But just being recognized as a modern go-to-market function, and that there are processes and best practices and tools like like a Homerun to be there. So I think it's not going away at all. I think people want to break in. It's a great place to be. You get a blend of technical side of things. You get a blend of sales side of things. You may be doing some of the post-sales work as well. I think it's just harder right now just because of, again, the kind of global economy.
Well, I think with that, right, for someone trying to potentially get in to pre-sales now, what advice would you give someone, right? Because we hear this all the time. Would it be, hey, get more technical, or should I maybe look down the sales path first and then try to move over into that? Again, everyone has a different way they got into this role, but if you were going to tell someone today what you think could be a good route, what's your take?
Yeah. I mean, I think I think there's three major paths in there. I think it's very hard to go from nothing into the role of a sales engineer. Because part of it is sales, right? So if you've done any kind of sales role from SDR to AE to whatever, then you're okay. I've got the sales side of it down. I may need to learn a domain expertise or product really well to be able to do that role. So you come in through the sales side. You come in through like a deep technical side of it, a developer, a product manager, something that's really deep on a domain or the product itself. And then you kind of move into a customer facing role now, even a customer support that moves into that role. Or you maybe were on the post-sales side. So you've been an implementation engineer, a consultant, something like that. And you're still customer facing, the product well, but you don't really have to sell anything. So now you move into a pre-sales role where you have to put a sales hat on. So if you have no experience in the sales engineering, I think your best bet is to kind of come in through one of those paths and treat it like it is training. You're going to get trained on sales, but you want to be an SE. You get trained on a domain because you came from cybersecurity, but you want to learn to get into the SE role. So learn a domain and then go into it, or work with customers and then work your way in. I think you can do it and just kind of land there, especially you'd have to find a company that is maybe not as technical as some of the others, because it's a little bit easier than to demo a product. Anyway, those are kind of usually the three paths that I would recommend somebody go and get some experience first and then kind of get into that SE role if they can.
I agree. I kind of did it from both sides. I started off in sales, didn't like it, went post-sales for about a good 9 years, just doing implementation, and then went into pre-sales because I knew a product super well.
Yep.
I agree. I think those are the paths. And a lot of people that I talk with, but actually I think you bring up a good point, right? Like, I don't hear as many people mention the customer support role, but I feel like that's a great role to really get your hands into both, where you're going to learn the product super well, but also learn how to deal with customers, do something customer facing.
Yeah.
Because some of the best SEs that I've worked with have started in that role too, because they knew the product super well, or started learning it and they knew how to get into really like tier 3 level issues.
Yep. Yeah, I think you're certainly the support or post-sales side. I mean, you come in with a different body of experience, domain or product. And then again, you have to learn to be a little bit more salesy than maybe you've ever had to be before, which can be uncomfortable in the beginning. And then you sort of realize that sales is ultimately about being helpful. And just kind of, if you adopt that as the framework or the mindset anyway, you can be quite successful, I think.
I would say not even just sales, but I try to view that in life. It's just like, try to be helpful, and I feel like good things will happen,
Well, you're a naturally good person. I think I am too. So I think we have it built in of just being like, that's just sort of who we are as people, which I think also, if that's who you are as a person, then pre-sales could be a good role, because you are there to try and help guide somebody through some challenges and see how you can help. So.
Perfectly agree. I think that is that's like a great way to end this right now. So Brian, thank you so much. Anything else you want to add before we call this a day for this great episode?
No, I think we covered a lot of ground. This was awesome. Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Brian. And again, check out Homerun Presales for anyone who's watching this too as well. Great product. Go onto his website, check out the demos, and also follow Brian Lewis if you want to find any great tidbits around just pre-sales in general. Like, again, this all happened because I saw a post and I interacted with it, and then we started talking, and now we get Persian food every now and then. So
yeah, you can too.
You can too. All right.